Have you ever felt exhausted from constantly explaining yourself, trying to prove your worth, or reacting to every judgment thrown your way? In a world full of noise, where everyone's competing to speak louder, show more, and be seen, there's a different path. One that's quiet, steady, and rooted in real power. Push hard, say nothing, watch everything change. This isn't just a catchy slogan, it's a philosophy. A way of living for those who've been misunderstood, doubted, or simply tired of wasting energy on meaningless arguments. This video isn't for those chasing quick applause or the spotlight. It's for you, the one choosing the harder path. Working without showing off, enduring without seeking validation. Today, we'll dive into 6 timeless Stoic lessons that can help you strengthen your inner core, master your reactions, and transform your life. Not through loud words, but through quiet action. Because when you stop explaining and start doing, the world eventually has to pay attention. If that resonates with you, leave a comment below that says, "I choose silent power." Let it be your quiet commitment to growth. And don't forget to subscribe, because here, we don't just talk change. We live it in a way the world can't ignore. 1. The power of not explaining yourself. There's a strange kind of silence that comes after being questioned one too many times. Not the silence of surrender, but the silence of clarity. A close friend of mine once made the bold decision to shift careers, from engineering to baking, from spreadsheets to sourdough. And every time he shared his choice, the questions followed like clockwork. Will you be able to pay your bills? Why walk away from a stable career? What are you trying to prove? At first, he tried to explain. He spoke about passion, about peace, about waking up excited again, but it never seemed enough, so he stopped, not out of shame, but out of realization. He no longer owed the world an explanation for a decision made with intention. He started waking up at 4 a.m., baking in a rented kitchen, taking orders quietly. No more updates, no more clarifications, just quiet progress. And one morning, 2 years later, a local magazine ran a story about his bakery becoming one of the city's most loved spots. That's when people started asking different questions. Not why, but how. This is the essence of Stoic wisdom. As Marcus Aurelius once said, "Don't waste time arguing what a good man should be, just be one." In other words, action has a gravity that words can never match. You don't need to speak to be understood. Often, the more you explain, the more you dilute your own clarity. And the more you seek validation through explanation, the more you abandon your power. True confidence is not loud. It doesn't plead to be seen or recognized. It doesn't react to every misunderstanding. It simply is. And in being, it becomes undeniable. There's a reason the Stoics valued silence, not as passivity, but as strength. When you explain, you unconsciously ask for permission. You hand your internal certainty over to the court of public opinion, and it's rarely kind. But when you choose to walk your path in quiet discipline, you shift the focus inward. You move from external approval to internal alignment. You no longer ask, "Do they get it?" You ask, "Am I living in truth?" That subtle shift transforms everything. You begin to understand that people's opinions, even the well-meaning ones, often come from their own limitations, not yours. And trying to be understood by someone who's never dared to follow their own calling is like trying to describe the ocean to someone who's never left dry land. Think about how much energy we spend trying to justify our paths to friends, to family, to coworkers, even to strangers online. We post to be seen, explain to be accepted, and react to be validated. But what if you redirected that same energy into building something so real, so solid, that it spoke for itself? That's where quiet power lives. In the early mornings, no one sees. In the process, no one applauds. In the resilience that doesn't need an audience. You don't need noise, you need proof. And proof doesn't come from speaking. It comes from becoming. When you push hard without the need to justify, you become rooted. Your actions are no longer diluted by the need to convince. Your clarity sharpens. And paradoxically, it is then, when you no longer try to be seen, that people finally begin to notice. Because the world listens more when you speak less. Not because of mystery, but because silent consistency is rare. In a culture that chases attention, being focused in silence is power. In a society that rewards loud ambition, your calm execution becomes magnetic. So if you find yourself constantly explaining, defending, or proving, pause. Ask yourself, is this serving my growth or just feeding my ego? The answer will always lead you back to stillness, back to discipline, back to the quiet lane where results are born. Let people wonder, let them assume, let them underestimate, because when the change finally becomes visible, it won't need your words to make it real. They'll see it, they'll feel it, and they'll know. Push hard, say nothing. Watch everything change. That's not just a mantra, that's a decision. One you make every day until the silence speaks louder than anything you could have ever said. 2. Let the ego starve. There's a specific kind of silence that doesn't come from fear or avoidance, but from power. It's the kind of silence you choose when your ego is screaming for attention and you refuse to feed it. I saw this clearly in a team meeting not long ago. A colleague quietly offered an idea. It was met with nods, but no real acknowledgement. Minutes later, another person, more vocal, more favored, repeated the same idea almost word for word, and suddenly the room lit up with praise. All eyes turned, all voices applauded. The original speaker didn't protest. She didn't roll her eyes or drop a passive-aggressive comment. She simply nodded, made a note, and moved on. A week later, she was the one who brought the idea to life in a way that couldn't be ignored, and no one questioned where the credit really belonged. That's the difference between reacting and mastering yourself. The ego craves recognition, justice, and victory in small battles. It wants to interrupt, to correct, to declare, "That was mine." But what does that prove, really? That you notice injustice? Everyone does. That you demand to be seen? So does everyone else. Stoic philosophy teaches us something harder, something more powerful. You don't need to win every moment. You don't need to be right in every room. Sometimes, not reacting is the greatest act of discipline you'll ever perform. Epictetus said, "It is impossible for a man to learn what he thinks he already knows." The ego convinces you that you already understand, that you deserve the credit, that your silence means weakness. But the truth is, ego blinds you to growth. Every time you defend your pride, you drain the energy that could have gone into becoming better. You trade peace for a moment of validation. And that's a poor deal. Real strength lies in restraint. The ability to hear falsehoods, to witness unfairness, to be overlooked, and still stay composed, still stay aligned, still build forward. Letting your ego starve doesn't mean letting people walk over you. It means you choose your battles with clarity. You don't fight for the sake of your image. You don't need every conversation to end with you on top. Instead, you hold yourself to a higher standard. You act with intention, even when others don't notice. And when the moment comes to show results, you let your actions deliver the truth you never needed to say aloud. This principle becomes even more vital in a world driven by performance. We live in a time where proving ourselves has become a daily ritual. Social media tempts us to correct every misjudgment, to respond to every slight, to declare our accomplishments the moment they exist. But in doing so, we feed a hunger that never ends. The more your ego eats, the weaker your self-control becomes. And soon, you find yourself chasing attention instead of building excellence. What happens when you stop feeding that hunger? You begin to notice where your energy truly goes. You begin to see how much time you used to waste on trying to be seen rather than simply being. You focus on depth, not surface. On legacy, not applause. On integrity, not visibility. And while the ego starves, your discipline grows stronger, steadier, and more unshakable. Eventually, people will notice. They always do. But by then, you won't need it anymore, because you'll already have become the person you once tried so hard to prove you were. Quietly, fully, undeniably, the recognition will arrive when it no longer matters. And that's the most powerful moment of all, because it means you've won something deeper than praise. You've won mastery over yourself. So the next time your pride demands a reaction, pause. The next time you want to interrupt, defend, or argue for your worth, pause. And in that pause, choose not to react. Choose to act. Choose to build. Choose to move forward while others are still arguing over who gets the credit. Let them talk, let them assume. You've got better things to do. Push hard. Say nothing. Watch everything change. Not because your voice was loud, but because your silence was powerful. 3. Stillness builds strength. In a world that glorifies motion, urgency, and the constant need to prove you're doing something, stillness is often misunderstood. It's mistaken for laziness, weakness, or indecision. But true stillness is not passive, it's intentional. It's the quiet force that anchors you when everything around you is falling apart. I remember watching my neighbor during the height of the pandemic. He had just lost his job, and while many around us scrambled, panicked, or posted their frustrations online, he chose a different path. Every morning, he woke up early. He watered his plants, went for a short jog, and then sat down at his kitchen table to take online courses. No grand declarations, no complaints, no digital cries for attention. 3 months later, he quietly opened a small computer repair shop right out of his garage. And when people asked how he managed to pull it off during such a chaotic time, he simply smiled and said, "I stayed grounded." That kind of stillness doesn't come from luck. It comes from strength. The kind of strength the Stoics spent their lives cultivating. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "Be like the rock that the waves keep crashing over. It stands unmoved." That is the essence of real calm, not absence of storms, but the refusal to be shaken by them. Stillness isn't about doing nothing. It's about doing the right things with clarity, consistency, and control, especially when the world around you is shouting, rushing, and collapsing into noise. Most people move fast because they're running from discomfort. They react before thinking. They speak before listening. They take action not from purpose, but from panic. But the Stoic way teaches something different. It teaches you to pause, to observe, to understand, and only then to act, with precision, with discipline, and without emotional chaos. In a sense, stillness is where you train your emotional resilience. When you don't need to post every step, when you don't need to answer every criticism, when you don't need to join every race, what you gain is a sharpened mind and a stable heart. This is not easy. We're conditioned to equate visibility with value. If you're not loud, if you're not moving, if you're not constantly pushing something out into the world, people assume you've given up. But here's the truth. Some of the strongest people you'll ever meet are the ones who are calm under pressure, focused in uncertainty, and consistent in private. They don't shake when others panic because they've trained themselves in silence. They don't break when others fall apart because they've learned to find peace within. When you build stillness into your life, you stop being pulled by every wave. You no longer let circumstances dictate your emotional state. You begin to act from a place of grounded purpose, not shallow reaction, and over time, that becomes your power. While others waste energy reacting to every shift, you conserve yours for what truly matters. You become deliberate, centered, and resilient, not because the world is calm, but because you are. I've seen this in people who never brag about what they're building. They just show up, day after day, quiet, focused, unshakable. And when the results come, it seems sudden to others, but it never was. It was the product of stillness in motion. Calm discipline repeated so many times that transformation became inevitable. They didn't rush, they didn't flinch, they simply stayed the course while the world spun in circles. So if life feels chaotic, if people around you seem louder, faster, more certain, don't rush to keep up. Slow down, sit still, listen deeply, and move only when your inner ground is steady. That's not weakness, that's power. That's the kind of strength no one can take from you. Not the job market, not critics, not fear. Because it's built in silence and tested in storms. Push hard, say nothing, watch everything change. Not by reacting, but by standing firm while the world reacts around you. That's what stillness really is. Not stopping, but refusing to be shaken. 4. Speak through results, not reactions. There's a moment in life when words no longer help. Not because you're out of things to say, but because saying them would drain the strength you've spent years building. A cousin of mine once faced that exact moment. In high school, his teacher told him he wasn't college material. Not in a malicious way, but with that quiet condescension that leaves a scar. He could have argued. He could have defended himself or begged to be taken seriously. But he didn't. He said nothing. Instead, he got a job delivering pizza at night, studied at a community college by day, and spent weekends reviewing textbooks most people wouldn't touch. No posts, no complaints. No need to announce he was proving someone wrong. And a few years later, he transferred into a top university, graduated with honors, and simply sent one photo to his old teacher. A cap, a gown, and the words, "Thank you." That's what it means to speak through results, not reactions. The Stoics understood this deeply. Epictetus once said, "Don't explain your philosophy, embody it." In other words, don't try to convince the world that you're capable. Show them with results that leave no room for doubt. When you react, especially in anger or hurt, you place your power in someone else's hands. You try to correct their perception, not because it matters, but because your ego feels threatened. That's a trap. And it's one that will keep you spinning, forever explaining, defending, chasing validation that doesn't last. But when you choose to stay quiet and move forward anyway, something shifts. Your focus narrows, your energy goes inward. You no longer need to prove, you build. And slowly the results speak a language so clear, so undeniable, that no argument is needed. There's strength in restraint. Especially in a time where the world rewards loud reactions, instant feedback, and quick comebacks, choosing not to respond is a rebellion in itself. It means you understand that real power comes not from saying you'll do something, but from doing it and letting time be the witness. Think about how many people spend their lives explaining what they're about to do. They announce every goal, defend every failure, and publicize every inch of progress. But in the end, the ones who truly shift the world are the ones who stay focused on doing the work. They're not absent, they're just occupied, too busy pushing forward to pause and argue. Their silence isn't weakness, it's discipline. You don't need to shout to be heard. The tree doesn't beg the forest to notice its growth. It rises, silently, every single day. You too can rise like that, quietly, without the noise, without the need for applause. Because if you live your truth with consistency, if you do the work when no one is watching, the outcome will speak louder than any speech ever could. Letting your results speak is not about waiting in silence for life to reward you. It's about putting your full attention into the process, without needing external approval to validate the journey. You act with integrity. You grow with humility. And when the time comes, your results do what your words never needed to. They change the conversation. They shift perceptions, and they silence doubt in a way no comeback ever could. So next time you're misunderstood, underestimated, or criticized unfairly, remember this: your reaction isn't required. Your effort is. Let people talk. Let them misjudge. Your job is not to explain your worth. It's to live it so clearly that even your silence commands respect. And when the day comes that your progress is visible, don't say a word. Just nod. Just move forward. Just let the world adjust to the version of you they never saw coming. Push hard. Say nothing. Watch everything change. Not because you raised your voice, but because you raised your standard. And that will always speak louder than anything you could say. 5. The discipline they'll never see. Discipline means everything when no one's watching. It's not about the image you show the world. It's about the promise you keep with yourself when no one is there to clap, comment, or notice. A close friend once shared something that stuck with me. Every morning before his daughter woke up, he practiced Spanish. Quietly. Alone. No streaks posted online. No journal updates. Just 15 minutes a day. Every day. He also started skipping lunch. Not to lose weight, but to squeeze in a workout in his garage. No fancy gym, no trainer, no music, just breath, sweat, and repetition. 1 year later, he could read Spanish books to his daughter. He stopped needing his blood pressure medication. And when people saw him, they said, "You look different." But none of them had seen the change being built. That's because the discipline that truly transforms you happens in silence. Marcus Aurelius, one of the most powerful men in history, didn't write his meditations to impress others. He wrote to realign his thoughts, to sharpen his focus, to stay anchored when the world around him demanded a reaction. His journal was not meant for eyes, it was a mirror for the soul. That's what real discipline is. Doing what you said you'd do, long after the mood you made that promise in has faded. It's easy to post motivational quotes, to list your goals, to tell people you're working on something. It's much harder to actually do the work, especially when the only witness is the person in the mirror. Stoic philosophy doesn't care how you look. it cares how you live. And the most valuable part of your life is usually the part no one ever claps for. The quiet consistency, the unseen commitment, the daily actions that don't go viral, don't get recognized, but still shift your entire trajectory. Discipline isn't loud. It's not dramatic, it's not inspiring to watch, but it's what makes the difference between people who dream and people who execute. When no one is looking, and you still show up, that's where your character is carved. When no one is checking and you still follow through, that's where integrity is born. In those moments, you're not just training your body or sharpening your skills, you're building something much deeper, your ability to trust yourself. Because the more promises you keep in private, the more confident you become in public. Not the kind of confidence that needs to announce itself, but the kind that walks into a room quietly and shifts the energy because it's built on substance, not style. And the truth is, most people won't understand this. They'll see the results one day and call you lucky, gifted, or naturally disciplined. They won't see the early alarms, the sacrifices, the skipped parties, the lonely repetitions. But you will, and that's enough. You'll know the price you paid. You'll know the nights you pushed through, the mornings you could have quit, and that knowledge will give you a kind of peace that applause can never give. You don't need people to see the journey. You need the strength that comes from walking it. So when you feel unseen, when the work feels thankless, remember this. Every step taken in silence is a step closer to becoming someone unstoppable. You're not behind. You're just ahead of your time. Because while others are waiting to be noticed, you're building the kind of resilience and clarity that can't be faked, can't be rushed, and definitely can't be copied. That's what separates strong minds from loud ones. Push hard, say nothing, watch everything change. Not because the world gave you permission, but because you were disciplined enough to keep moving when no one was looking. 6. Progress in the shadows. Progress doesn't always come with applause. In fact, the kind that truly matters, the kind that transforms who you are at your core, almost always begins in the shadows. I used to live next to an older man. Quiet, reserved, the kind of neighbor who kept to himself and spent most of his time tending to his small garden. To anyone passing by, it seemed like a peaceful retirement, nothing more. One day, I struck up a conversation with him, just curious. He told me, calmly and without drama, I had a mild stroke last year. It affected my right hand, so now I'm learning to write again with my left. He wasn't bitter, he wasn't looking for sympathy, just committed. Each morning he practiced, stroke by stroke, letter by letter, slow, steady, silent. Months later, he was writing again with ease. No fanfare, no announcement. But something shifted. Neighbors began to greet him with more respect, not because he demanded it, but because his quiet persistence became undeniable. That is progress in the shadows, the work no one sees, the discipline no one praises, the growth that happens without permission or attention. And yet, that's where the most powerful transformation occurs. Stoicism doesn't ask you to win in front of an audience. It asks you to master yourself when no one's clapping, to keep walking when no one is cheering, to get better, not for the camera, but for the kind of life that doesn't need performance. Because what you build in silence can never be interrupted by noise. Modern life pushes the opposite. Visibility is the new currency. People post their intentions before they take their first step. They announce their goals before they've committed to the process. But what happens when no one likes the post? What happens when no one validates the path? Most stop. Not because they're incapable, but because they were built for attention, not for impact. Progress made in the dark, however, is immune to that. It doesn't depend on likes, shares, or validation. It's driven by something deeper. Intention, purpose, self-respect. Every meaningful change begins before the world notices. The weight lost before someone says, "You look great." The language is learned before you dare speak it out loud. The skill sharpened while others are still doubting. These are not acts of pride. They're acts of silent strength. And when practiced daily, they create a kind of quiet power that no one can take from you. You become anchored not in who notices you, but in who you're becoming. The Stoics knew this well. They never waited for the world to recognize their virtue. They acted in accordance with their values, whether or not anyone was watching. Marcus Aurelius wrote his Meditations in solitude, not for readers, but for himself. Epictetus taught that the path to freedom was internal mastery, not external validation. That's why progress made in silence is more than just a tactic. It's a way of life. A slow, steady movement away from approval and into authenticity. When you stop needing to be seen, you start to see yourself more clearly. You stop adjusting your rhythm for the crowd. You stop measuring your value by how many people know what you're doing. And in that space, real focus is born. You give yourself permission to take your time, to make mistakes, to get stronger without performing for the world. And ironically, that's when the world begins to notice. Not because you asked them to, but because you've become too solid to ignore. So the next time you feel like your efforts are invisible, remember that visibility is not the goal. Mastery is. Quiet consistency is. Inner alignment is. Keep going, even when no one sees. Especially when no one sees. Because in those moments you're building something more lasting than approval. You're building identity. You're becoming someone who doesn't need the spotlight because their life speaks louder than any announcement ever could. Push hard. Say nothing. Watch everything change. Not because the world applauded, but because you changed in the places they didn't see. And that's the kind of growth that never fades. 7. Quiet power changes everything. Real power doesn't come from controlling others. It comes from mastering yourself, quietly, consistently, without needing anyone to notice. I once knew a man who worked night shifts as a security guard at a local supermarket. Most people overlooked him. They thought the job was simple, routine, and unimportant. But every night, while the city slept, he read books, took notes, and learned how to repair electrical systems. He cleaned his workspace meticulously, carried himself with quiet pride, and treated each task, no matter how small, as a reflection of who he was. No one asked him to do more. No one expected him to grow. But he did. Not for attention, not for applause, just because he knew who he wanted to become. 5 years later, when the company expanded, he didn't apply for a promotion. He didn't ask. They came to him. Because everyone already knew he was the one who could be trusted. That's what quiet power looks like. It's not about force, it's not about being loud, impressive, or dominant. It's about becoming unshakable in who you are. When you cultivate strength from the inside out, discipline, clarity, self-respect, you naturally draw things to you: respect, opportunity, stability. You don't have to chase them. You become the kind of person they find. And that is a completely different game. Stoic philosophy teaches this with clarity. Marcus Aurelius, who ruled an empire, never wrote to impress his people. He wrote to check himself, to control his impulses, to make sure that even in power, he remained humble, steady, and disciplined. The Stoics knew that power not grounded in self-mastery will collapse the moment it's challenged. But quiet power, the kind rooted in truth, discipline, and calm that cannot be undone. When you stop reacting to the world and start anchoring yourself in quiet growth, you begin to notice something subtle. The world shifts around you, not because you forced it, but because your energy changed. You're no longer begging to be respected. You've become someone who doesn't flinch when ignored or misunderstood. You don't explain your goals, you embody them. You don't fight for your place. You become so grounded, so reliable, so precise, that your presence commands space without needing to announce itself. This quiet power isn't something you develop overnight. It's forged in moments of restraint, of stillness, of choosing patience over pride. It's built every time you choose to stay focused while others chase validation. Every time you let your work speak instead of rushing to prove something. Every time you practice emotional control instead of reacting in anger. And over time, that builds a kind of inner weight, a presence, a strength that doesn't need to speak because it can be felt. You may not get recognized immediately. You might even be overlooked for a while. But the beauty of quiet power is that it compounds. It grows silently until one day it's undeniable. People start asking for your input. They listen when you speak, not because you've demanded their attention, but because you've earned their trust through consistency, integrity, and silence. So if you're in a season where your efforts feel invisible, where your growth isn't being acknowledged, don't panic. keep going. Stay centered. Every small act of self-mastery is another brick in a foundation that no one can shake. Power built in silence is the kind that lasts. It can't be manipulated, it doesn't collapse under pressure, and it doesn't depend on anyone else to exist. Push hard. Say nothing. Watch everything change. Not because you fought to be seen, but because you became so grounded, the world had no choice but to shift around you. That's what quiet power does. It doesn't announce itself. It simply becomes undeniable. In a world driven by noise and instant reactions, choosing stillness, discipline, and silence is no longer common. It's powerful. Stoic philosophy teaches us that the loudest message you'll ever send doesn't come from what you say, but from how you live. When you push hard behind the scenes, say nothing to seek validation, and focus on what truly matters, your life becomes the proof. You don't need to explain, defend, or prove. Just act. Stay grounded. Let your quiet habits, your emotional control, your daily stoic practices, your inner discipline, reshape everything without saying a word. Progress built in silence creates the kind of strength that noise cannot interrupt. So, whether you're just beginning this journey or already walking it, remember, your results will always speak louder than your reactions. Stay consistent, stay focused, and let time work in your favor. We want to hear from you. What silent transformation are you working on right now? Share your story in the comments below. Your words might inspire someone else who's walking through their own unseen season. And if this message speaks to you, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more powerful Stoic content to strengthen your mindset every day.